Sup? Do you believe in free will?
In this episode you will learn: how can two brains live in one person? What is our unconscious? How to put a worm in the matrix? And damn it, is it even possible to investigate such an abstract phenomenon as free will? Watch this video and I assure you, whatever you believe about freedom may be, you will think differently after watching. Charles Whitman. Look at this young man. He sang in the church choir, led the local scouts, worked as a top engineer and had a uniquely high IQ. He was also a current husband. Yeah, what a good man. So what was he famous for? In 1966, he killed his wife and mother, shot 40 people and wounded 32 hours. Texas Sniper, that's his second name. But what led him to do such a horrible thing? Next to the bodies of his murdered mother and wife, Whitman left notes about how he loved them deeply and that he saw no rational reason to kill them. Even a year before the bloody madness, Whitman complained to doctors of headaches and sudden flashes of rage. In his suicide note, he asked that after his death, his brain be opened and all the money he had saved be given to a fund for the study of mental illness. Whitman's fears were confirmed. A tumor was found in his brain, which was pressing on the cerebral amygdala. And that's the little thing responsible for our rage and aggression.
It's pretty creepy. It's kind of scary to live knowing that a trivial squeezing of a tiny part of the brain can make a person do mass murder. But thank God we're healthy people. You probably don't have a cancer in your brain. We make our own decisions consciously and independently, taking all factors into account. Yeah, it's nice to lie to yourself. And it's not that free will doesn't exist, but that it's completely different from what we think it is.
Freedom is the right to decide for yourself. What are you mumbling over there?
Today's freedom is the possibility of clicking on thousands of channels, downloading free porn. It's basically
Doing stuff that you're not going to get punished for, and that's all.
And the reason is our brain. Or to be more correct, our brains, because there are at least two brains in the head, and they work quite independently of each other. No, seriously, it's not my fantasy, it's a neuroscientific discovery. So how do they know this?
Look, this is our brain. It's made up of two halves like a walnut. On the top is the cortex, which is what makes you so smart. We use it for our thinking, speech, memory and a lot of other cool stuff. And if you notice, on top the brain's halves are connected by a septum. Today scientists know that it connects the two hemispheres of the brain together by neuronal outgrowths. But back in the early 20th century, some scientists thought it was needed just to keep the two hemispheres together. And in the 40s, doctors decided to split the brains of some of their patients in half by simply cutting the septum. No, they weren't some bloody monsters. They were trying to help their epileptic patients to relieve their attacks in some way. They succeed, and the patients did get better. But the interesting thing is that they didn't have any side effects.
Wait, we cut people's brain in half and they didn't even notice? And then some researchers decided to look at the problem from a different angle, rather to get patients to look differently. Hey, like this video, click on the bell and subscribe to the channel.
Michael Gazzaniga, a renowned neuroscientist, decided to conduct an unusual experiment. No, he didn't cut anything that time. The researcher just placed a septum in front of the patient's nose, so that the left and right eyes could see only their own half of the space. Then the scientist took and showed an ordinary spoon on the right side of the septum and asked the patient, did he hear anything? He answered in the affirmative and said that he had seen the spoon. Then Michael did the same thing, but on the left side. He was surprised when the patient told him that he had not seen anything. Someone would have thought he was blind, but that was not that case. The patient's eyes saw everything. Gazzaniga decided to modify the experiment a bit, and showed a chicken coop on the right side and a snow-covered road on the left side. The patient said that he only saw a chicken coop. The partition was then removed, and the patient was asked to select picture card that had some connection to what he had seen. The right hand chose a chicken leg, but the left hand chose a shovel, and the choice was logical, because this object could be used to clear the snow. But most interesting was how the patient explained his choice. It's simple. A chicken foot refers to a chicken. And then he looked at his left hand and added, and to clean out the chicken coop, you need a shovel. So what happened? The fact is that the nerves from our eyes and hands go to different halves of the brain, crosswise. That is, the left hand and left eye are connected to the right hemisphere and vice versa. When a patient looks at some object, it's usually seen by two eyes and there are no problems. But thanks to the septum, it was possible to show a single picture to each hemisphere of the brain, and they couldn't betray anything to each other because they were cut. Conscientiously, the patient didn't know anything about the snow-covered road, but the brain had to explain somehow why it chose the picture with the shovel.
But why could the patient only tell us what his right eye saw? And here we come to the most interesting part. Our brain is about 86 billion neurons. That's a lot. And the hard part is connecting them so that they work properly. Of course, you could just connect each neuron to another neuron, but then our brain would be about 20 kilometers in diameter. Anyway, the brain has no choice but to break down into little clumps of neurons, each with its own functions.
They work relatively autonomously and don't know much about each other, and each of them has its own conditioned press secretaries, thanks to whom they communicate with each other. Scientists managed to discover that in the left side of the brain we have areas responsible for speech. That's why the patient couldn't tell anything about what he saw with his left eye. But then, why do we, consisting of hundreds, if not thousands of different models, feel whole and united? For this, in the left hemisphere, we have what is called the interpreter. It's like a storyteller in your head. It combines information from other parts of your brain and then tries to put a story together.
Let's consider a simple case. You touched a hot plate with your hand and jerked your hand away sharply. If I ask you why you did that, you will honestly tell me that you decided to do that because the plate is hot and you didn't want to get burned. But in fact, your answer is a lie. In reality, you pulled your hand away from the hot surface only because the thermoreceptors in your skin transmit a signal to your spinal cord and you reflexively moved your hand.
The signal from your hand's receptor has not yet reached your brain, but thanks to the neurons in your spinal cord, your hand has already moved away from the hot surface. This happens because automatic and reflex processes work much faster than conscious ones, and thanks to them, you remain unharmed. Only later, the interpreter will compare all the information and tell you a beautiful story about the danger of burns and how good you are for pulling off your hand so skillfully.
It's hard to admit, but everything we know about ourselves is fiction. Just a story that the areas in our left hemisphere have put together based on the little information available to them. People with brains split in half have shown that an interpreter will try to put together a logical and beautiful story, even when it doesn't have access to the whole half of the brain. Our conscious understanding is just the tip of the iceberg of the unconscious processes that are going in our heads. We think we are free to control ourselves. But tell me, have you ever managed to silence your head or just put it to sleep? But the bigger problem is that no matter how hard we try, we can't make ourselves want something.
Or as Arthur Schopenhauer said, man does at all times only what he wills, and yet he does it necessarily. But this is because he already is what he wills. Someone wants to become a great artist, someone wants to become a talented actor, and someone wants to make videos on YouTube. Oh, forgive me, mom. Paradoxically, it's our conditional desires, which you can't change, that will determine what you will do. If you consider all the previous facts, you may think that free will doesn't exist, but this is a wrong conclusion. Meet Caenorhabditis elegans, a common worm that lives in gardens. And this is the same worm in the Matrix. How did it get there? The thing is that it's very well studied. Scientists know the structure of literally every cell, as well as all the connections of 302 neurons that make up its nervous system. Researchers digitized and recreated it in virtual space in the OpenWorm project. In addition, they also created a small world for it, similar to the one in which its real relatives live. In it he can eat, reproduce, and enjoy its worm life. You can even put one of them on your computer. The project is in the public access, the link to it is in the description. But how can a worm be related to free will? The behavior of the worm in the Matrix almost completely repeats the behavior of its real relative. And by placing the virtual worm in the same conditions in which we want to place the real one, we can literally predict the behavior of real worm in the near future. The worm is only the first steps of researchers to move living objects into the virtual world. The further we develop, the more complex object we will be able to stuff into the Matrix. You and I are made up of the same cells as our worm, and there is a high probability that one of the people will also be in the Matrix someday. And what then? By placing a virtual person in the conditions we're interested in, can we predict his behavior? And the clear answer is no, we can't. Since the model of our brain will be a complex chaotic system in which the smallest error can change everything, it cannot be calculated in any way. The case of the worm shows the problem of determinism. Determinism is a concept that says that every action has a cause, and the whole world is made up of cause and effect relationships. And since this is the case, there can be no free will. This view of the world appeared in ancient times, and for many people it's still relevant. But in the 20th century, many scientists began to look at the world differently. This position is the emergentist view of the world. Don't be afraid of the clever word, I'll explain it to you. It's funny, but the same guys who essentially created scientific determinism, physicists, came up with it. After all, it was Newton's laws that served as its main justification. Everything was fine until quantum physics appeared in the 20th century. The fact that even Einstein couldn't understand it was half of the problem. The main problem is that its laws work only in the microcosm and there are no rules for large objects, for example for ordinary tennis balls that bounce according to Newton's law. The principle of emergentism says that a complex system has new qualities that its individual parts don't have, and that it can be reduced to them. To put it simply, studying a single ant, you can learn almost nothing about the anthill and life in it. And the study of individual neurons will tell you little about the sensory experiences of a person. About 100 years ago, it seemed to mankind that by dividing the whole world into billions of tiny parts and studying them separately, we could understand it. But reality is another. When billions of atoms joined together, they created the solid matter from which the planets emerged. When our brain became made up of billions of neurons, they created our psyche.
Today we are not very surprised that a computer can be controlled by a program. So really, there is no paradox in the fact that an abstract spirit controls our body, because the spirit was invented by you and me. There is only the brain and the story of yourself that the interpreter in the brain has so beautifully compiled for you. At the end, no matter how skeptical you are, your psyche is the only thing you can be 100% sure exists. Yes, we are very limited in our freedom because for the most part we operate automatically, and you can separate an organism's psychology from its biology. But do we really want to be free? Our heart beats automatically, and we don't have to think every second about how to breathe. Our memory records events, and our bodies make vital decisions in extreme situations. Free will is more about a matter of faith. But if 100 years ago science told us that this phase is rather naive, today it doesn't seem so to us. Sarah J. Weber was with you, and remember that the world is much more complex and interesting than you may think.